The Isle of Wight. It's impressive, isn't it? Anyone arriving here by boat can't fail to be impressed by these dominating sea cliffs. It's a real land of contrasts. It's constantly being eroded by the power of the sea and by storms, and yet it's a very warm place, a place of shelter for continental species trying to colonize Britain.
In this series, I'm visiting some of Britain's most outstanding areas of natural beauty to discover the fascinating wildlife that has made these places their home. This time, my journey takes me along the dramatic coastline of the Isle of Wight.
This is a fascinating environment. You have some of the rarest marine habitats to be found in Britain on this island. I'm hoping also to see other special things, weird things that live in the rock pools, some unusual butterflies, and even evidence of giant creatures that once roamed the shoreline here in prehistory.
I'm the head, you're the end of the tail.
With 60 miles of coastline, the Isle of Wight is the largest island off the English mainland. From the iconic Needles in the west, I'll be travelling along the southern coast to Bembridge Ledges in the east.
These rocks here are the Needles. They're really impressive, and they show you just how powerful the sea is because it's carved out these deep gullies through the chalk there.
The waters around the Isle of Wight are among the most treacherous in the world. At least 4,000 shipwrecks litter the seafloor, and my first port of call lies 4 nautical miles off the Needles.
The currents that rip through here are famous for their intensity. You put that together with a storm and you can understand there can be real problems for sailors at sea. This yellow buoy here marks just such a tragedy. In 1881, a schooner here called the Fenner sank. Fortunately, no one lost their life. But when these boats hit the bottom, they become an artificial reef, which today can teem with wildlife, which is exactly the case on the Fenner.
The wooden hull is long gone, but the Fenner's cargo of railway sleepers and plate glass remains. Shoals of bib, the most common fish in British waters, are regular reef visitors, and at least 2 conger eel have taken up permanent residence. Conger eel are shy, carnivorous fish which hide away by day and hunt by night. 44 species have been recorded at the Fenner, including the spiny spider crab. The way in which the sea shapes the coastline can be more comprehensively studied here on the Isle of Wight than virtually anywhere else in Britain.
It's really fascinating. I'm walking along a land surface that's 125 million years old, but there's a lot of other history to be seen here too. In the distance there you can see the chalk. When that was deposited, Britain was underwater. The chalk's the remains of billions and billions of tiny marine creatures that died and their bodies fell to the seabed. Then later on, the chalk gets pushed up, the land surface rises. In this area the chalk was eroded, but what we have up here are still different strata representing different periods of history. And if you look very carefully into this layer here, you can see bits of wood sticking out. Those are the remnants of the first forests to grow in Britain after the last ice age. And in there you find hazelnuts eaten by dormice, charred wood, remnants of forest fires back in those days. And of course this process of layers being laid down is still ongoing.
The The eroding cliffs also reveal evidence of creatures that walked this land before the last ice age. The Isle of Wight is indeed the most important place in Europe for dinosaur fossils. Stephen Hutt, a local paleontologist, is taking me on a walk back through time.
This is the oldest rock on the Isle of Wight. These levels, which are now on the tilt, are the dinosaur sort of roadways. They walked along these ledges, but of course it was all flat in those days. It was part of a gigantic floodplain.
At low tide, it's possible to walk out to evidence of a dinosaur.
Slightly tilted sandstone layer.
I can usually identify an animal from the tracks it leaves in soil, but what can a line of three-toed footprints in rock tell us about what left them and how it moved?
For me, this is really tough, Stephen, because when I look at tracks, in my mind, I normally see the animal moving as it laid the tracks. But here, I can't picture the animal.
You can never be absolutely sure which dinosaur made a print, but you've got to be logical. The commonest dinosaur fossil, as against footprint, we found on the Isle of Wight, belonged to the plant-eating dinosaur Iguanodon. Iguanodon is a name which means tooth like the modern iguana lizard, because that's what they thought it looked like all those years ago when they first found it.
But these tracks are not being laid down like a modern lizard.
Right.
Lizards move like this.
That's right.
But this is walking more akin to the way we walk.
Absolutely. One foot in front of the other,
Yeah.
underneath the body, not sprawled out like that.
But it's the first time I've tracked dinosaur.
Closer to the cliffs is clearer evidence of the Iguanodon. Here, the footprints, which are filled with mud and hardened over time, have begun to fall out of the eroding cliffs, like a plaster of Paris cast. From these, we can work out how big the dinosaur actually was.
Well, I mean, that is the size of the track of an African elephant.
This cast is 60 centimetres long. Stephen can estimate the hip height with a quick calculation.
4 times 60, 100, 200 foot, that's 2 metres. Call it nearly 3 metres, and that gives you the hip height.
Okay.
So if I stood on this thing, we're now around here for the hip height thing, and it's 3 times that height, which will give you the length of the animal. So let's say I'm doing a metre a time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
It's amazing, isn't it?
I'm the head, you're the end of the tail.
You know what that makes me think, though? That these animals, were, for their size, were quite lightweight.
They're very thin, they're very deep-bodied, but they're very thin. It's all about, as the animal moves on 2 legs, most of its time, it sways its body, so you can't do this because you're going to straddle. And we know from the trackways they didn't straddle. They walked in a straight line. They didn't do a duck waddle. They did a nice sort of pheasant swim.
And what we know about the tracks is that they're walking like this.
Yeah, that's right.
So they're placing their foot down but lifting it as they move, which is very much like a bird.
Yes.
Well, it's like a cockerel.
Absolutely.
With the tide coming in, I'm heading up to higher ground.
It's fantastic sitting here on the top of the cliff. To be careful, mind you, but what a ringside seat I've got. Got a lot of different plants here, from this wild cabbage you see growing here. There's a precursor to our cultivated variety. We've got salad burnet here, this delicate leaved plant that you can add to salads, but it's better if you find it growing in a moist place. But the real pièce de résistance has to be this. I can literally dip my feet into one of the rarest habitats to be found within Britain. Because for the space of about 2 meters, running along the very edge of these chalk cliffs, we have a maritime chalk grassland habitat. It's incredibly rare. It's rare just because it's the edge, but also because it erodes the whole time. And the plants that live here are real specialists. We get lovely things like this white flower there. That's sweet Alison, this vibrant flower that's growing here. This is a sea stock. And that's one of the rarest plants in Britain that manages to survive because it doesn't need quite as much soil as the plants further inland. And that's its secret. It manages to get a toehold where the other plants can't outcompete it.
These crumbling cliffs are also the last refuge of an insect locked in a life or death battle with a parasitic adversary.
Boundaries are always interesting places. This is the southern edge of the British Isles, but it's the northern edge for the range of a particularly rare butterfly, the Glanville fritillary. They used to be much more common in the mainland, but they've retreated, and today the Isle of Wight is the only place you'll find them. I've only seen a couple of butterflies, and that's not surprising because this butterfly has got a particularly interesting life cycle. They like to lay their eggs on this particular plant. This is sea plantain, which is a real specialist for the edge of the cliff. The population, though, crashes about every 4 years, and this is a year when the Glanville fritillary population is in short supply. The cause of that crash are these little wasps here that lay their eggs into the caterpillars of the butterfly. And eventually, of course, the population drops, and then the population of the wasps will decline and the butterflies pop back. So there's this constant flux between these two species. It just shows you how complex nature is and how tenuous the lives of some creatures are.
My journey is taking me 8 nautical miles offshore to the southeast of the Isle of Wight, to a known hotspot for 2 of Britain's larger shark species. Alan Deeming is a sports fisherman who's part of the UK shark tagging programme, the first monitoring project in the UK to use anglers to provide scientific data.
It's not too badly tangled, Alan.
Oh, excellent. Thank you, Ray.
We're setting lines to try and hook either smoothhound or taupe, because so little is currently known about either species in these waters. But Alan has a theory about what draws the sharks into this particular area in the summer.
We tend to get mostly females coming in at this time of year, and we think that's because they're going to drop their pups. The amount of males compared to the females is very small proportion most of the time. And I'm personally of the opinion that the taupe that we get coming in here at the same time are coming in to feed off that food source, or the little baby smoothhounds that are being released into the water in, a fairly confined area. Ray, you have a fish on.
Oh, right, we've got one. Here we go.
Have fish on. Right, I'll just tighten the drag up a little bit for you.
Yeah, there you go. Wow.
A smoothhound has taken our bait. We have to work quickly to limit the time the fish is out of water, but record the scientific data we need.
There it is, there it is.
So,
beautiful.
Rather than damage the fish, I land them by hand.
On the tray.
This is a female, but showing no obvious signs of pregnancy.
Very strong. I mean, the strength of this fish is quite astonishing.
It's phenomenal. They have rasping jaws, which are really powerful to crush crabs and other crustaceans. 14?
14, yeah.
Right, what we're going to measure is from the fork of the tail,
right,
which is
34.
And I think that's another inch about there. Right, OK then, so we'll get the tag out.
Of course, a lot of people don't realise how rough the backs of sharks are. In the past, they used to make sword grips from shark skin for that reason.
Yeah, right then. Are we ready?
So that's the tag in. Now, that doesn't harm the fish.
No, that's right.
Yep.
It's totally plastic, so there's nothing there to corrode or to release any toxins into the fish, all designed specially for this purpose.
So this is tag 30648.
Right.
Okay.
And it's Starry Smoothhound.
How do you tell the difference?
In strict scientific terms, it's impossible to tell just by looking. But generally speaking, the Starry Smoothhound has all these white spots all along its side. If there's no spots on it at all, then we think it's almost certainly a plain, common smooth hound. And it's a female.
Yep.
We agreed, and it's
Yes.
in good condition.
Yeah, very good condition.
Right, excellent.
Okay.
I think
Shall we release her?
I think that's ready to go back again. And
We're quite good too. We're quite fast at this. How long can they be out of the water, really?
well, I think a lot would depend on the temperature, but you know, sort of 12, 15 minutes probably would not do them any great harm.
Yeah, she's beautiful. She's only been out the water a couple of minutes.
Yeah,
That's great. There you go.
Hopefully, the next time this shark is landed, the information from its tag will be fed back to the scientists.
Off your pop. Fantastic. It's gone. Back down to the deep.
Right.
Thus building a clearer picture of the migration and breeding behaviour of sharks in these waters.
Come down here to explore one of the most interesting habitats to be found in Britain, the intertidal zone, that some people say is as important in terms of biodiversity as the tropical rainforest.
The intertidal zone is the area between the land and the sea, which is covered by water at high tide but is exposed at low tide.
You know, having a look under the rocks here, there's
Jolyon Chesworth is the Marine Conservation Officer from the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust.
under boulder communities are a fabulously rich habitat. You get all kinds of things. So we've got here a long-clawed porcelain crab there. They like to live under these boulders in the nooks and crannies.
Now, what size will this little crab grow to?
A little bit bigger, probably, you know, sort of maybe getting on for about a centimetre. So they're quite small crabs.
Tiny, isn't it? Is that a brittle star you've got?
Yeah, that's right, just there. One of the smaller brittle stars. Again, frequently found under these boulders. They get their name because their legs are very brittle and they do have a habit of falling off. But they're related to starfish, and like starfish, they can actually regrow their arms again. So if they do lose them, they can just regenerate. They're fabulous.
So delicate. Should we go further up?
Yeah, let's go and see what else we can find.
Looking under rocks and seaweed is a great way to see what lives there, but you should always put them back exactly where you found them to protect the wildlife living underneath.
These are called swimming crabs because they have these flattened back legs, which they can kind of use as paddles to help propel them through the water. These are usually one of the most feisty crabs.
The habitat starts to change as we head further out. Coastal lagoons like this are relatively uncommon in Britain.
In these lagoons, it has a different type of habitat. Instead of being the harder rock, it's now got a sandy bottom inside here. And as a result, there's an enormous diversity and array of different seaweeds here. But also not just seaweed, something even more special than that, and that's actually flowering plants. And that's this stuff here. This is called seagrass or reel grass. Yeah. And unlike the other things that you can see, it's actually a true plant. So it has roots, and it has pollen and flowers and seeds, all the kinds of things that seaweeds don't.
Seagrass is the world's only flowering plant to thrive in salt water. More importantly, seagrass meadows can store more than twice as much carbon per square mile as the world's forests, so protecting this habitat could be critical in the fight against climate change.
Is this part of it as well?
No, so this is what we call wireweed or Japanese weed. This is actually an alien species, so it doesn't really belong on our shores.
So how did it get here?
It's thought to have been brought to continental Europe into France with consignments of oysters which were shipped from Japan and China. And from there, it's thought to have made its way naturally across the channel. And in fact, this area, Bembridge, was the first place it was spotted anywhere in the UK back in 1971. And since, it's spread all along the coastlines. And in areas like this, it can be really quite prolific.
And the diversity of the marine vegetation here is quite astonishing.
Absolutely, it really is, you know, full of life, and people don't often appreciate just how, you know, rich and diverse and interesting and fascinating some of these different habitats and creatures actually can be. You don't have to go to the tropics to see great wildlife. You can just come down to your local shore.
Fascinating, isn't it?
It is fantastic.
The cliffs offer spectacular views at sunset and give me the chance to see a bird which has made a remarkable comeback.
If I could choose one bird to watch all day, it would have to be the raven, the largest member of the crow family to be found in Britain.
Persecuted by people, raven numbers once plummeted to around 1,000 breeding pairs. Today, there are 12,000. Its traditional range is the western half of Britain, but this iconic bird is now expanding further east and breeding in new areas.
They are doing remarkably well. These steep sea cliffs provide perfect nesting sites where they're safe from predation. It's lovely to see these young birds up here, this tender moment in their life. They're incredibly intelligent birds. I've really enjoyed being here on the coast of the Isle of Wight. From this tenuous strip of life on the edge of the cliffs to the sharks out in the channel, it's been amazing. But there's something really organic about our coastline. The tide coming and going is like the heartbeat of nature itself. And it's a force that can't be ignored. And I think that, for me, has got to be the best reason of all to spend time on the coast.